Hi, everyone. This is going to be a series on American Indians. And this first episode, we ask, are the American Indians the 10 lost tribes of Israel? And who were they? They were the 10 northern tribes. Judah and Benjamin were in the south. And then there was the tribes of the north. And they basically were taken away by the Assyrians. That would be towards Babylon. So they were moved east and they were never heard of again, supposedly in history. And there is some question mark, I think, that we can ask. Did they continue to migrate east, maybe past China, then up north, cross the Bering Strait, and come into the Americas? So that's not that hard to believe because there's other groups that traveled a similar distance to make that trip, and we've covered that in another episode. So, and if they are the lost tribes, that would mean they're of Jewish heritage. So let's take a look at what some of the evidence is I found in the past, and then I'm going to show you a more recent article that confirms it in more surprising ways. So I was looking only at historical books from the 1600s, and they had it, and so I'm going to show you some of that, and I'm just going to show you a bit of what I've done before. Then I'm going to show you this more recent article from Inside Israel. And then in episode 2 or part 2, we'll look into more in depth of the research I'd done previously. All right, so on the website, JewsWordsOnly.org, we have an article, American Indian Religion, Parallels to Judaism, Parallels to Jewish Beliefs. And I just want to read you, I'm going to just show you one paragraph. There's many paragraphs, so we're just going to look at one paragraph as an introduction to this article from Israel recently in 2016. So let's read this paragraph. In the 1600s, missionaries detected similarities in some beliefs of American Indians and the Jewish people. In Chrysostom Verwoest's book, Missionary Labors of Fathers Marquette, Menard, and Eloy, he discusses that, quote, they observe some Jewish customs. He then explains an example. They do not use a knife to cut meats at certain festivals. When women give birth, they do not sleep in the same tent with their husband for 84 days. The same custom applied among Jews for 80 days, or it should be the law at that time. In Mallory, in his Israelite and Indian, a parallel in Planes of Culture, 1889, he explains among Indian persons with running sores, they were kept confined at a distance from others. This was true for Jews under the Mosaic Code. Mallory notes a missionary, Adair, recorded cleansing and bathing customs very similar to the Jews were practiced by the Indians. At the annual expiation of sin, there was the cleansing of homes too. One tribe followed the procedure of the scapegoat, just as the Jewish people followed. Now, I've pulled up all the citations for these 5 footnotes, and I'm going to show you them briefly. All right, so the first book to look at is Missionary Labors of Fathers Marquette, Menard, and Eloy in the Lake Superior region by Reverend Chrysostom Verwoest of Bethel, Wisconsin, 1886, Hoffman Brothers. I suppose what this is just for the record here, Reverend would mean a Protestant typically, and the words fathers before names usually means Catholic. So these are Catholic priests that are being read in historical records by Protestants, and then the Protestants are putting forth the summary of what they see there. This is 1886, so this is after the Indian Wars and the conquest of the Indians by the American government. Indian Customs of Lake Superior, page 193. So this is just an example. It cannot be asserted that pagan Indians profess any doctrine. It is certain that they do not follow, so to say, any religion. Now, this is, I think, a direct quote. See, these are quotes. These are quotes out of these Catholic fathers. Of course, they're very opinionated. Let's put it that way. They only observe some Jewish customs, so they recognize some parts of what they do or the customs. They give examples. First, for they have certain feasts at which they do not make use of a knife to cut the meats that have been boiled, but tear and devour them with their teeth. Their women also, when they have given birth to a child, have the custom of not entering for 1 month the cabin of their husbands. They are not even allowed during that all the time to eat with the men, nor to partake of anything prepared by them. For this reason, they do their cooking apart. So it's just an example. Now, another book I found, Israelite and Indian, a parallel in Planes of Culture by Garrick Mallory, page 19. And he begins by commenting on the Jewish historian, Josephus, and then he's going to compare Josephus' remarks to the life of the Indians. And he says this. Josephus remarks about the Israelites that, quote, beginning immediately from the earliest infancy, nothing was left of the very smallest consequence to be done at the pleasure and disposal of the person himself. That means that the life as a believer in Judaism is from this smallest age until death. God has commands and rules about everything that covers your life, more or less. How you're born, how you die, and in between, there's laws of how to live. The next says this. The same remark would be true regarding the Indians. Their religious life was as intense and all-pervading as that of the Israelites. It is yet noticed in full effect among the tribes as widely separated, but both by space and language, as the Zuni and the Ojibwa, and their practices are astonishingly similar in essence and even in many details to some of those still prevailing among us. Among the Hurons, and the Iroquois, there were religious rites for all occasions, among others for the birth of a child, for the first cutting of the hair of a child, of its naming, for its puberty, for the admission of a young man into the order of warriors, and promotion from warrior to chieftaincy, etc., etc. Now, I'm just going to skip to page 19 here. Shamans. Among the Indians, there was frequently an established and recognized priesthood, obtained by initiation into secret religious societies, corresponding in general authority with the Levites, although the latter were instituted in a different manner, perhaps initiated from the exclusive class of the priesthood in Egypt. The shamans in all tribes derived a large part of their support from fixed contribution or fees. And he doesn't mention it, but the Levites basically were supported through the tithe contributions of the people of Israel. Adair, I think he's a priest, describes a special ceremony for the admission or consecration of a priest among the southern tribes as follows, quote, at the time of making the holy fire for the yearly atonement of sin, the Sagan clothes himself with a white ephod, which is a waistcoat without sleeves, and sits down on a white buckskin on a white seat and puts on it some white beads and wears a new pair of white buckskin moccasins made by himself and never wears these moccasins at any other time. I mean, if you know anything about the high priest, this sounds very similar to the extreme holiness that he has to have. It says right here, similar exclusive use by the high priest of the garments used on the Day of Atonement is mentioned in Leviticus. All right, page 23, pollution and purification. I thought this was interesting because it's a very distinct thing that you wouldn't expect every culture to copy this and have this without an integrated direct connection somehow. The subject of pollution and purification. The subject of pollution and purification has been much and properly insisted upon as affording a striking parallel between the Israelites and the Indians. The Indians made special huts for the women at certain periods who were considered so unclean that nothing which they touched could be used. A Muskoke woman, after delivery of a child, was separated from her husband for 3 moons, that's 84 days. This may be compared with the Levitical law by which the mother of a female child was to be separated 80 days, of a male 40 days, and Dr. Boudinot says that in some Indian tribes there was similar distinction between male and female children. Page 23. Among the southern Indians, wounded persons having running sores were confined at a distance, as in the Levitical law, and kept strictly separate. An Israelite dying in any house or tent made all who were in it and all the furniture in it polluted. Let me just say, you could just use the word unclean. You have the same concept, unclean or polluted. And this pollution continued for 7 days. All who touched the corpse or grave were impure for the same time. Similarly, many of the Indians burned down the house where they had been a death, and all persons in it were polluted. Many writers have asserted as one of the excellencies of the Israelite customs that the purification imposed upon those who had been engaged in a burial was a sanitary regulation. So there's a benefit. It was like God knows that it's necessary for sanitation. Did these primitive people know this? Probably not. That's another thing. You would not, without experimentation and actually true medicine and experiments, you wouldn't know for a fact that any of these things make any difference, except God tells you have to have a principle of clean and unclean. Some things are unhealthy, some things are healthy, and it's defined by a divinity, a deity above you who knows these things, but you can't possibly know the level of science you're operating at. So this is really striking. It's a striking similarity, which you would not expect it to happen in more than a culture. You would expect it only to happen in a culture that is truly serving the true God at some point in its history, at some earlier time. Actually, we should all look at that. The unclean rules actually. Now I just want to digress. Do you think the clean and unclean rules had more than one purpose, because it would show to every generation thereafter, when we wouldn't have the scientific age and we would know how these people were doing what they were doing was good for them. And we may be in denial that it was good for them, but it is good for them, the way they were living and what they wouldn't eat, and so on, and how they prepared foods and all these things. These and how they kept their bodies away from certain situations and unclean and dead people and all these things. We do not know. And even circumcision itself is so subtle, the science. Have two videos showing you the science on that. It takes scientific studies to know the circumcision indeed is good for for human males. So where did these people get these truths? These are scientifically proven, but why were they doing it? So it seems to me that's a proof of deity, a true God. The only one who would know this is outside of our uh, how can I put it, scientific capabilities at the time these were first introduced into culture. And it turned out, just coincidentally, they're great for you. They're good for you. I think it's a proof of God's God gave these commands not only for their benefit, but for as a witness to later generations that these people could not possibly have known these things scientifically, and it had to be just given them by a deity who knew they were good for them. But let's continue. Page 25. Okay. Now, next, Adair says that at the festival of the first fruits of the southern Indians drank plentiful of the kuzina and other bitter liquids to cleanse their bodies, after which they bathed in deep water, then went sanctified to the feast. So, interestingly, how there's a washing for sanctification in there. He doesn't mention that, but I see that. And it's just a matter of fact that they did first fruits dedications, just like the Israel people. I don't know if that's in any other culture, but that clearly is an interesting parallel between Indian culture and the culture that God Yahweh had created in Israel 2.5 or so millennia ago. And then continuing, their annual expiation of sin was sometimes at the beginning of the first new moon, in which their corn became full eared, and sometimes at the accidental season of harvest. I'm going to pause there. This is so interesting. Obviously, there's the Day of Atonement, the annual expiation of sin inside of Israel. I don't know if that's in any other culture either, but the Indian culture had it. Uh, so we'll get back to this again. There's one more part of this that is an expansion of what this annual expiation is about that we will be surprised, and we'll get to it in a few seconds. Then they cleansed their temple and every house in the village of every supposed polluting thing, carrying out the ashes from the hearths. They never ate nor handed any part of a new harvest till some part of it had been offered up. I'm going to pause there. So you got this cleansing of the temple, cleaning of your house. There are polluting things that you have to worry about, just like in the Mosaic Law. And so you want to get rid of those polluting things. And so certain times of year, leaven is bad. You want to get it out of your house to make a point that was, you want to eat only unleavened bread to go back to your way when you were in Egypt or something like that. So there were all kinds of uh, interesting traditions about polluting or unclean things or temporarily things you shouldn't eat, that it's coinciding, it looks to me, in some respects to the Indian culture and the culture that God Yahweh created in the land of Israel in the ancient times. Page 26. It is probable that what the authors have called the Days of Atonement or Expiation was really a general wiping out of offenses or settlements of accounts between individuals, and particularly between clans, after which there should be no reprisal. I want to pause there. Many Christians could summarize this and not realize the Jews had a special rule about using atonement. You could not be ready to do the atonement, and Jesus reemphasizes this very point in Matthew 5. You weren't allowed to use the atonement on the Day of Atonement unless you had engaged in what the priests had set up is called the 10 days of awe. And those are the 10 days prior. And in that time period, people were supposed to seek reconciliation with each other and get forgiveness before you went and had an atonement. So God Yahweh said multiple times, I prefer obedience over sacrifice. He doesn't want you just to do a sacrifice. He wants this period before then, the 10 days of awe in Jewish culture, to observe this practice of getting forgiveness by reconciling with people you've offended and maybe pay back debts you haven't paid and so on, and get that all cleared before you try to get atonement. You don't get atonement just by the rite itself. You have to be in the right spiritual position to seek and get and obtain atonement. And this is actually Jesus' lesson in Matthew 5:21-23, where he says, if you come with your sacrifices, not translated so you can see what he's saying, but if you brought your atonement sacrifice to the altar, the sacrifice altar, that's the word in Greek, you brought your sacrifice atonement to the sacrifice altar, and you know someone has something against you, you must go back home, leave your gift there, leave your doron, which is in Hebrew and in Greek is signifies a atonement gift. Leave your doron there, go all the way back to home or wherever you offended, reconcile with that person. It could be God, by the way, it could be man. Whichever one you reconcile first, then you can come back and use atonement. But you're not allowed to use atonement until you've done these works worthy repentance. And there's a whole code section that is you typically called works worthy repentance by uh, commentaries, commentaries from that time period. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see the Zadik, the just one, writes two works called on good works. So they were designed to be works worthy repentance. And that's even how Jesus and John the Baptist refers to them inside the book of Matthew, and for both John the Baptist and for Jesus. All right. Anyway, so I think that's just this shows you a different aspect of atonement in Jewish law and in Jesus principles, that you have to get forgiveness for everything by acts that you do preparatory to going to the Day of Atonement service, and expecting that atonement would apply to you. You can't expect it will apply to you if you haven't done those days of awe, and as Jesus has put down your gift, go back and be reconciled to the one and ones you've offended. Now it continues. This is illustrated by a peculiar ceremony among the Iroquois, strongly resembling the scapegoat of the Israelites. And some people won't want to hear this, so if you don't want to hear about an animal being killed, don't. Just close the volume down now for 5 seconds. A white dog, before being burned at the annual feast, was loaded with the confessions of repentings of the people, represented by strings of wampum. The statute of limitations then began to operate. Okay, so all of you who didn't listen for the last 5 seconds, okay to listen now. Okay, so now with that preface, I want to read to you a recent article at it's a website called Israel 365. Okay, so now I'm going to read from most of the article here. Are Native Americans part of the 10 Lost Tribes? Adam Berkowitz, Biblical News, October 25, 2016. When Europeans first glimpsed Native Americans more than 400 years ago, many were convinced they had discovered the lost tribes of Israel. At a closer look, the connection are astounding. I'll pass over some things to save time. Unmistakable traces of Jewish prayer echo in the voice of Joseph Riverwind, the Amaura war chief of the northern Arawak nation, the indigenous peoples of South America and Caribbean. So, by the way, the Indians we have in the American Indians are related with the Indians in the South. So there's a cultural combination that you'll find crossing over. But this one's very interesting because he sings Shema Shema Nayena Papaska Oya Ya. And I should have highlighted the word Ya there. He translated this ancient Native American song for Breaking Israel News. It says, "Listen, listen, people, as you gather together, we will dance before the Creator." So the Creator is actually the word Yah. Did you get that? I just saw that as I was reading it. This is strongly reminiscent of the Jewish prayer Shema, which literally means hear. I wouldn't say it's just reminiscent, it's the same, essentially, except for the dancing part. These two worlds are embodied in Chief Riverwind, a descendant of both Native American B'nai Anuzim Jews who had hid their identity as a result of the Spanish Inquisition. So that's 1500s. For him, the connection between the Native Americans and Judaism is clear. So what I think, just for informational purposes, I think his family immigrated and became part of the tribe that we're talking about. But we'll see. Among my people, our ancient name for God is Yah Yah. So this is the concept that before they came and met these people, they'd already had these names that they were worshiping, the name of Yah. That's what I'm understanding is saying. The supreme spirit of spirits, very similar to Yahweh, Chief Ruin explained. Among my wife's ancestors, the Ani-Kutawa Yah, the Cherokee, they called God Yohawah. And the similarities don't stop there. They carried an ark into battle. They celebrated 7 feasts. They kept the seventh day of rest, had cities of refuge, and don't eat pork. Though the eerie etymological similarities may be coincidental, archetypal themes also connect the spirituality of Native Americans to the Bible. I'm going to pause there. So I could have said not American Indians. I could have just said Native Americans because that would cover North and South America. So somewhat, if you're talking to someone, you might want to use the word Native Americans to refer to both North and South America. All right. Now this is fascinating. Chief Irwin told a Choctaw story about how the creator came to a man named called Nuawa. Could this be Noah? Nuawa. And told him the world would be covered with water. The man was told to make a great raft to save mankind. The stories come from oral traditions which date to pre-Columbian times. That means before the white man ever came to America that we knew about. And quote, another Native American story tells of a time when the world was all one landmass and we were all one tribe, explained Chief Riverwind. We tried to build the sky tower to the creator. These are pre-missionary oral traditions. They are passed down through specially trained storytellers who are forbidden from changing a single word. This transoceanic cultural connection goes against most scientific theories about the origins of the Native Americans. Most anthropologists theorize that the Native Americans are descended from Siberian Mongolians who migrated to North America via the Bering Strait, a 50-mile wide gap that separates Alaska from Russia. Now, I don't know what the basis of that is for. We can be looking into that in the future. But clearly, the likely options are either there was transatlantic ships that came over, like the Phoenicians traveled the whole world. Why couldn't they have traveled here? They were considered great sailors. Or it could have been over the Bering Strait, but that really would depend upon the seasonal weather patterns where the ice would melt. So that's the question mark about how that happened and when that could have happened. Then it says this. Chief Irwin told Breaking News, Israel News, that the Native Americans tell a different story. Some Anishinaabe Chippewa believe that they are from the tribe of Ephraim. This is what Chief Riverwind explained. Anishinaabe is amazing, similar to the Hebrew words Anshenavi, the people of the prophet. They lived on the coast, but their legends say that before that they came across from the great waters. We have cave drawings of these ships that are very similar to the drawings of Phoenician ships in history books. This theory is astounding, but archaeological artifacts connecting North America to ancient Israel are not uncommon. The Decalogue stone, I'm going to just read what he's saying here, but I have more of that information coming in part 2. And this is the Decalogue stone. So this is Paleo-Hebrew in the middle of a desert. And Paleo-Hebrew means a language going back to the pre-Dead Sea Scrolls time. That's what I understand Paleo, or at least started then, and maybe it continued for so many centuries. But that's remarkable. And it's the shame is because it got damaged by vandals. Nobody has ever paid any attention to this. But I mean, it's amazing if it's a real thing. But nobody's tested it. You'll see. It was found in New Mexico. It's an 80-ton boulder on which an abridged version of the Ten Commandments is inscribed in ancient Paleo Hebrew. A letter group resembling the tetragrammaton, I can't say it. I'm going to just say YHWH, or Yahweh, makes 3 appearances. So 3 times in that stone, we see the tetragrammaton in a letter group that resembles the tetragrammaton. The stone is controversial and has never been tested in a lab or dated by scientific means. If authentic, it would prove a pre-Columbian connection between North America and Israel. The Newark Holy Stones, this to me is even more amazing. I mean, that's pretty amazing if that's true, right? The Newark, but this seems to be having been verified, what I'm going to now tell you. The Newark Holy Stones are artifacts discovered in 1860 within a cluster of ancient Indian burial mounds near Newark, Ohio. The mounds are one of the largest collections from an ancient American Indian culture known as the Hopewell that existed from approximately 100 BCE to 500 CE. So they have not existed in any way for 1,500 some odd years since. And so the modern Indians don't even claim lineage to this group. They just died out. or they moved or whatever. And then it says this: similar to the Decalogue stone, the Newark stones are inscribed with Bible verses in Hebrew. That's pretty remarkable. So I want to look into that. We'll look into that. Many of these artifacts are discounted as hoaxes based on circumstantial evidence, the improbability of their existence, and what it implies, despite strong corroborating empirical proof of their validity. So that's interesting, right? So some people like to dismiss things that would change their viewpoint of where and how we all got here. But I think it's always useful to learn where the Indian people came from. What is this culture? Chief Ruin attributes this simply to ethnocentric tendencies. European historians have always underestimated so much of what was going on here before Columbus. They simply can't imagine men sailing from Israel to North America even when they are holding the proof in their hands. Ronnie Segal, the academic advisor for eTeacher, an online language academy, was fascinated by the possible connection. Paleo-Hebrew dates back to the 10th century before Christ's era. The language itself is a key to many ancient mysteries, she told Breaking Israel News. Though these discoveries are surprising when studying the language that was used by God to communicate with man, these types of connections are not entirely unexpected. All right, now this article is going to go into a messianic destiny. And we need to know from a Jewish perspective, a messianic destiny is those passages like in Isaiah 11 and 56 about this future world where animals don't get killed and all that. So they expect the Messiah comes by that time, not earlier. So that's just, the juxtaposition here. So this Jewish interviewer or this Israeli newspaper is asking questions of this gentleman and finding out that they have this messianic age idea too, that there will be time of basically a world kind of peace. So let me tell you what the Indian tradition in that respect that this Israeli person is recording. Many would be surprised to learn that the Native Americans also have a messianic vision. Despite being expressed in different terms, it is similar indeed to what Jews believe. So this is not necessarily equal to Christians because we believe the Messiah comes in two phases, right? The first coming and the second coming. First Nations have many prophecies that have been passed down for generations. We know that in the long ago time, the Creator destroyed the earth with water, and today we are living in the generations when the fires will come to purify the earth, Chief Riverwind relates. Chief Riverwind related. Your people's ancient stories can be found among my people's ancient stories, and we share the same destiny. Many of us have called upon the same Elohim since ancient times, and in the end, all the tribes that have been scattered will be gathered together once again. So that's the end of the article, but it's an interesting article. Next time, we'll go into some of the research I've done over the years, and it's quite a lot. I've always been just fascinated, just as a matter of history, because if you go to Canada, I experienced Indian tribes more when I went to Canada. Here in the United States, sometimes the Indians are kept on these reservations, so they're really far away from any roads where we ever see them. But in Canada, they're like right in your face. And when I lived in Costa Rica, there were tribes too, and they all seem to have this mysterious quality about them, meaning that they're expected to stay in their little area and not really leave. Although some people obviously they don't stay there always, but it's just a strange feeling when you're in these regions, and I was curious about them. Also, would be think it would be helpful to know that God Yahweh's word has penetrated to all over the world, and this would be another proof that it happened here in this our hemisphere here on North and South America. And it's just the fact that I would like to know more about, and I hope you do too. If you're interested in it or you have some information you want to share. Now, I do have another practical reason why I want to do this is Jesus. I'll say his last name is Q. Jesus Q. He has his own channel, and he had mentioned to me that the Alaskan Indians. So this is just north of Canada, right? Canada has a lot of Indians, and then north of Canada is Alaska, and so he has on his heart a ministry objective to go help the American Indians inside of Alaska, and they get virtually ignored by every. Washington doesn't pay any attention to these tribes because they're just very poor. They're left alone. Nobody educates them. Nobody teaches their children anything. So he appealed to me and he said, "What do you think we could do?" So I do hope in the future to do something, and he already has a ministry going on in that regard. So we'll see. So we'll keep you posted on that, and maybe Jesus will give you some contributive information in the future through my channel or on his own, and I'll send you links for that. Okay, well, God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.